On screen, Uma Thurman became the bride, a woman with a katana fighting through the crazy 88 as if pain belonged to someone else. Then the frame breaks. Off screen, the image changes to a blue convertible on a dirt road, crashing into a palm tree. Kill Bill sold revenge as control. Thurman later said she was pressured into that driving shot, hurt in the crash, and left fighting for years to see the footage. The director kept the vision. The studio protected the movie's public image. Her body kept the bill. When Hollywood sells pain as empowerment, who controls what we see? Before Hollywood could turn Uma Thurman into a fantasy of control, there was a child learning how to stand outside the room. Her early years were shaped by Tibetan Buddhism, low voices, and arguments about meaning. Born in Boston, Uma grew up between Amherst, Woodstock, and periods in India, inside an unusually intellectual Buddhist-influenced family. Her father, Robert Thurman, was an academic of Indo-Tibetan Buddhism and a former monk, known in some circles as Bob. Around him moved scholars, monks, travelers, and people chasing a language for enlightenment. That world could feel less like an ordinary family home and more like a place where ideas were always in the room. In one corner stood Uma. She was tall, watchful, and already aware that her body made adults look twice. That childhood gave her a strange kind of armor. She grew up near people who treated money, beauty, and status as thin surfaces. The lesson was not spoken like a rule. It lived in the air. Do not confuse attention with value. Do not mistake Polish for truth. Long before Hollywood had a chance to package her face, she was being trained to suspect packaging itself. But no philosophy could protect her in the school hallway. Outside the house, difference became a target. Her height, features, and unusual name marked her before she could explain herself. The wound sharpened when an adult joined the chorus. According to biographical accounts, when Uma was still a child, an adult close to her world reportedly suggested she should get a nose job. A sentence like that does not land as advice. It lands as a verdict. It tells a girl that even grown people are studying her face and finding it wrong. Her name added another layer. Uma came from a sacred tradition tied to the name of a Hindu goddess. Inside her family, it carried meaning. In school, it became another signal that she did not belong. For a while, she reportedly softened the name into Uma Karen, a version easier for other people to accept. That is how a child begins to split herself. One self carries the name, the body, the family history. Another self is built for survival. Smile here, shrink there, change the name if it makes the room quieter. The cruelty was not one blow. It was repetition, a daily lesson that her face and identity could be treated as public property. Acting entered her life as an escape, but not the soft kind. It gave her a legal way to disappear. On stage, she could step out of the body classmates had mocked and borrow another one for a while. A character did not ask whether her nose was wrong. A scene did not laugh at her name. Performance gave her a place where being strange could become power. By her mid-teens, she left school and moved toward New York, chasing modeling and acting work before she was fully grown. She did not arrive with a studio deal or a famous agent clearing the path. New York did not receive her like a future star. It made her work. It gave her modeling calls, auditions, rejection, and the pressure of surviving before success arrived. Rejection is not glamorous, but it teaches a clean lesson. Nobody owes you tenderness. Nobody saves you because your dream is beautiful. That is why this part of her life matters. It breaks the easy myth of the fragile muse waiting for a man to discover her. Uma was not a greenhouse flower. She had already practiced exile inside her own name. She had already lived inside a body other people tried to edit. She had already learned how to move through rejection without letting it finish her. The child from the Buddhist house and the teenager in New York were the same person. One had been taught to see past surfaces. The other had been forced to survive them. Together they formed a young actress with an unusual resistance to the cheap promises of fame. But resistance is not the same as safety. A girl can survive school cruelty, financial pressure, and loneliness, and still be unprepared for a machine built to turn ambition into leverage. Uma did not know that yet. She was learning discipline and waiting for the door to open. Behind that door, Hollywood held a danger more complicated than any insult from childhood. It would not look like a trap at first. It would arrive with a script on the table, a luxury room, and the smile of a powerful man dressed as a benefactor. London, in the mid-1990s, did not look like danger. It looked like old money, polished brass, heavy curtains, and a hotel suite where film business could pretend to be civilized. The Savoy was more than a luxury address. For a young actress, it could feel like a private branch of Hollywood power. Uma arrived believing she was entering a professional meeting. The earlier Paris meeting had used work as its frame. By the Savoy, that professional frame had become part of the danger. Paper can make a closed door feel legitimate. It can turn a hotel suite into a workplace even when the walls belong to a man who controls films, careers, and access. She was expected to trust the ritual, pages, notes, polite talk, the old promise that art could keep everyone civilized. That promise was the bait. If the meeting had a script, then surely it still belonged to work, not fear. Or so it seemed. By then, she had already seen a warning sign. In the account she later gave, an earlier hotel room meeting had involved a bathrobe and a situation disguised as eccentricity. She tried to read it as strange behavior, not danger. That is how power softens the alarm. It teaches the young performer to doubt the body before doubting the man with the money. The Savoy stripped away that confusion. Thurman later said Weinstein assaulted her. Weinstein's side denied the harsher version. But the emotional shape of her story is clear. A meeting about work became a closed-room fight for control over her own body. That is the rule Hollywood rarely says aloud. Men who hold budgets and distribution do not need to announce their power. It enters the room before they speak. It sits in the knowledge that one phone call can open a career or seal it shut. For a young actress, politeness can become a cage. Saying no can feel like risking every door that has not opened yet. Uma tried to pull the situation back into logic. She had spent her life around arguments, ideas, and words. She knew how to think her way through discomfort, but a trapped room does not reward intelligence. It rewards escape. In that moment, reason lost its authority. The body took over. Her later description became one of the ugliest images in the story. She said she moved like an animal wriggling away like a lizard. The sentence stayed because it stripped fame out of the frame. No movie poster could protect her there. No beauty, no intelligence, no rising status could change the basic fact of the room. She was trying to get free. That image matters more than any polished red carpet photograph. It shows what happens when a system sells actresses as untouchable, then leaves them alone with men treated as gatekeepers. The public sees the gown, the premiere, the face lit by flashbulbs. Behind a hotel door, the same woman can be reduced to breath, panic, and the need to reach the hallway. The humiliation was not only physical, it was professional. A script had been used to make the meeting look safe. The language of cinema had opened the door, then vanished when she needed protection. That betrayal leaves a mark. The business frame can collapse in seconds. When it collapses, the person with less power is expected to manage the wreckage alone. She escaped the room. That sentence sounds clean, but escape is not the same as safety. A corridor can give the body space, yet the career remains inside the other person's empire. The man she said had crossed the boundary was not a stranger on the street. He was tied to projects, reputations, and the kind of films that could shape her future. That is where fear changes form. During the encounter, fear is immediate. Door, hand, breath, distance. Afterward, it becomes strategic. What happens if she speaks? Who will believe her? Which assistant, lawyer, agent, or executive will decide that the easiest solution is to make her difficult, unstable, ungrateful, or replaceable? The Savoy became more than a hotel in her memory. It became a lesson in how quickly glamour can turn into a locked room. It showed her that the industry's most dangerous spaces do not always look dark. They can look expensive. They can have a script on the table. They can begin with professional language and end with a woman fighting to return to herself. She left with her body intact, but the story was not over. The next move would not come as another conversation about dialogue or character. It would arrive the next morning as a gift, bright, expensive, and rotten at the center. The next morning did not bring a clean break. It brought flowers before anyone could explain the silence. After the Savoy, after the locked room panic, a large arrangement of yellow roses arrived where Uma was staying. On that morning, it looked like proof that the man she had escaped could reach across the city and place beauty at her door. That is what made the gesture so cold. A normal apology asked for repair. This arrangement asked for control. It turned the private shock of the night before into an object she had to receive, touch, read, and carry in her memory. They were a message with petals around it. The card made the message sharper. It said, "You have great instincts." 5 neat words dressed as praise. But praise can be another kind of erasure. He was not naming what she said had happened. He was naming her escape as talent, as if her panic had been a useful performance note. The sentence tried to fold danger back into charm. That is why her reaction matters. Thurman later described opening the card like opening a dirty diaper. The flowers had color, size, and expense. Beneath that polish, she felt rot. The beautiful surface could not cover what the gesture seemed to be doing, turning violation into etiquette. Many people misunderstand this kind of pressure because it does not always sound like a threat. It can arrive wrapped, signed, and delivered by someone in a uniform. It can smell sweet. It can make outsiders ask why a victim did not take the apology and move on. But the body knows the difference between remorse and possession. It knows when a gift is asking for silence. Uma refused to let the gesture end the story. She went back to confront him. According to her later account, She brought a friend and wanted the meeting to happen in the bar. A public room gives witnesses. A public room makes power work harder. But the center of gravity shifted again. She was brought back upstairs alone. The setting returned to the kind of space where the rules had already failed her once. Still, she did not go there to negotiate a role, a contract, or a scene. She went there to draw a line. Her warning was severe. She told him that if he treated other women that way, he would lose the life and status he had built. Those were not casual words. They were the only weapons available to a young actress facing a man protected by money, assistance, rooms, and silence. For a moment, the power moved in the other direction. She was not asking him to understand her pain. She was telling him there would be a cost. That is why the confrontation remains one of the most important scenes in this chain. It shows her not as a passive victim, but as someone trying to stop the pattern before it reached another woman. Then the memory breaks. According to the reporting, her recollection of what happened next stopped abruptly. That blankness is not a dramatic decoration. It is part of the wound. Trauma does not always preserve events in clean order. Sometimes it leaves a corridor, a door, a face, and then a gap where language should be. The aftermath came through another witness. Ilona Herman, Thurman's friend and makeup artist, later described seeing her return in a state that frightened her. The version Herman gave was not glamorous. It was a woman shaken out of herself, disordered, hollowed out, with eyes that no longer seemed anchored in the room. That image should sit beside the flowers. Yellow roses at the door, a blank look in the lobby. One is the surface Hollywood knows how to sell. The other is the human cost after the surface has done its work. Together they show the machinery of silence. Charm first, pressure second, collapse afterward. When Thurman could speak again, Herman said she described a threat against her career. Weinstein's side denied making that threat and described the relationship differently. That legal caution matters. For the emotional logic of the story, one point matters. Uma believed she faced a man who could reach her room, her work, and her future. That fear did not stay in the hotel. It followed her into the years ahead. She would keep appearing under lights, keep reading scripts, keep moving through rooms where everyone behaved as if the business was normal. Inside, another lesson had been installed. Smile for the camera and watch your back. To understand why 1994 became so confusing, step back to Pulp Fiction. Publicly, that year gave her Mia Wallace. Privately, according to her later account, the same orbit also brought hotel rooms, flowers, and fear. She needed a place where her strangeness did not have to apologize. Quentin Tarantino was still closer to a fast-talking outsider than a crowned master. He had a script full of criminals, broken time, sudden danger. Uma hesitated. The material frightened her. The tone felt rough, vulgar, and difficult to trust. After what she had already survived, that hesitation made sense. But Tarantino did not approach her like a replaceable face. He argued, explained, circled back, called, talked, and kept talking. Accounts of the film's making described long conversations around Mia Wallace. He needed her to see the role as more than a decorative wife in a gangster story. Mia was an atmosphere. She was a question mark in a black wig. She was danger, boredom, wit, appetite, and deadpan control sitting at the same table. That mattered because Hollywood had learned how to look at Uma's body before listening to her mind. Tarantino seemed to do the opposite. He listened to the oddness. He leaned into the awkwardness. He saw the tall girl who had never fit neatly into a room and turned that misfit charge into style. The same features that once made her feel exposed became, through his camera, part of the spell. Then Mia Wallace stepped into public memory. The black bob, the white shirt, the cigarette, the slow stare across a restaurant table, the twist with John Travolta, the overdose sequence with an adrenaline needle turning panic into pop culture shock. None of it looked like the frightened woman from the Savoy. On screen, Uma was unreadable, dry, slightly bored with the danger around her. That was the seduction of the role. It did not heal the wound, but it gave her a new surface to stand behind. Mia did not ask to be liked. She did not explain herself. She did not soften her edges so the audience could relax. In a business that often punished strange women, Tarantino made her strangeness look expensive. The result was more than a hit. Pulp Fiction became one of the defining films of its decade. It won the Palme d'Or, earned Academy Award attention, and turned Uma into a cultural image that could travel without explanation. Her performance brought an Academy Award nomination. The frightened young actress, once told to change her face, now had a face the culture could not stop copying. This success created a powerful emotional confusion. Tarantino had not saved her. He had not erased the hotel rooms, the threat, or the fear. But he had given her something rare, a role that made her feel seen without being flattened. For an actress who had been treated as a target by one kind of power, that recognition could feel like rescue. Their dynamic began to harden into myth, the director and the muse. He spoke in references, obsessions, film history, rhythm. She gave those obsessions a body, a face, and a stillness that made the chaos believable. Together, they looked like proof that art could make a damaged system feel cleaner. That was the beautiful lie, sitting under the collaboration. Because trust built through art can become dangerous when it goes untested. Uma began to believe that a man who valued her mind on screen would protect her body off screen. It was a human assumption, not a foolish one. If someone can see your intelligence inside a frame, you want to believe he will see your limits outside it. By the end of Pulp Fiction, Uma had been remade in public. She was no longer only the woman carrying the private memory of a hotel room. She was Mia Wallace, the nerve center of a movie that changed American cinema. But the stronger the myth became, the more dangerous the dependency beneath it grew. That dependency would not break in a casting office. It would be tested under brighter light, far from Hollywood, on a coast built for applause. 7 years later, the man she trusted would step between her and the old threat. That gesture would make the blind spot nearly impossible to see. Under the bright sun of the French Riviera, the old fear returned wearing festival clothes. Cannes in 2001 was built for flashbulbs, yachts, tuxedos, and deals whispered over champagne. For Uma, the glamour carried another temperature. Harvey Weinstein was there too, moving through the Miramax orbit as if the past had no weight. She was no longer the uncertain young actress from the Savoy years. She had become Mia Wallace, a name, a face, an image the industry could sell. But the body does not care how famous the face has become. When the person tied to the old room enters the same social space, the nervous system remembers before the mind can organize a sentence. According to later accounts, Tarantino noticed the change in her, the way she moved around Weinstein, the guardedness, the attempt to stay composed while avoiding the gravity of his presence. That reaction mattered because Tarantino was not reading a rumor from a distance. He was standing beside the actress who trusted him, watching the past leak into the present. For years, Hollywood had survived by teaching people to look away. Everyone knew how to make a scene smaller. Call it tension, call it bad chemistry, call it old history, call it something nobody needed to discuss in public. This time, Tarantino did not let the discomfort dissolve into polite silence. Tarantino later said he confronted Weinstein and pushed him to apologize before Kill Bill moved forward. A reluctant apology followed. Thurman later described it as half-hearted, not healing. That distinction matters. An apology can be forced out of a powerful man without becoming remorse. It can close a logistical problem while leaving the deeper wound untouched. For Uma, the words did not repair the Savoy. They did something more complicated. When someone stands up for you at the moment others stay silent, gratitude can harden into dependency. The person who intervenes becomes proof that the world is not closed. He becomes the exception, and when someone becomes the exception, saying no to him later can feel like betraying your own rescue. That was the hidden cost of Can. The problem is that a protector can become a savior, and his authority changes shape. His demands can sound like faith. His pressure can sound like artistic seriousness. His risk-taking can be mistaken for vision. The same gratitude that keeps a person close can make refusal feel almost impossible. So when the doors of the next production began to close, Uma entered the production already trusting him. Weinstein had been pushed back. Tarantino had been elevated. The space seemed protected. The wound seemed named. The old threat seemed contained. But a protected room can still become a trap if one person inside it holds too much authority. The savior figure can become another kind of ruler. As the cameras prepared for Kill Bill, the refuge began slowly to reveal a different shape. Not safety, but obedience demanded in the name of art under the lights before anyone named it. On a normal set, danger is supposed to have paperwork. A stunt coordinator marks the limit. A performer says no. The camera waits. But Kill Bill was not sold to its cast as normal labor. It was sold as devotion. If the body hurt, the answer was discipline. If the day went too far, the explanation was art. The training made that lesson physical. Vivica A. Fox later wrote that the cast, including Uma Thurman, trained for 3 months, 8 hours a day, Monday through Friday. Martial arts, sword work, repetition. The schedule was not a warm-up for glamour. It was a factory for endurance. Every bruise could be rebranded as commitment. Every exhausted silence could be read as proof that the actor cared enough. That is how auteur pressure works. It does not always begin with cruelty. It begins with a beautiful sentence. This is what greatness requires. For Uma, that sentence carried weight. So when his methods grew harsher, resistance did not feel simple. It felt like a debt becoming due. The set itself fed that debt. Kill Bill demanded sweat, precision, and the image of a woman who could survive anything. The bride had to look invincible. The woman playing her had to keep returning to the sword, the marks, the costume, the next take. Pain was not removed from the process. It was folded into the mythology of the film. Then, The boundary moved from training into the shot. In one scene, the script called for Michael Madsen's character to degrade the bride. According to reporting and Tarantino's later explanation, he did not leave the action to the actor on camera. He stepped in and performed the humiliating action himself, saying he wanted control over where it landed. That explanation sounds technical. That is why it is disturbing. The body on the floor became a surface to be aimed at. The director was no longer only shaping the frame from behind the monitor. He entered the frame through contact. A humiliating image was treated as a problem of accuracy, not dignity. Another scene pushed the question further. The bride fights Go-Go, whose weapon is a ball and chain prop. Reporting focused on the fact that Tarantino personally handled the chain scene around her neck. His defense was that the effect had to look real, and that consent and trust were part of the setup. But trust is not a clean word when one person controls the film, the cut, the tone, and the room. A performer can agree inside a structure that makes refusal costly. A director can call it responsibility. The viewer can call it realism. The body still has to absorb the pressure. This is the core of the problem. Cinema often rewards the image while hiding the method. If the scene looks convincing, the audience applauds. If the actor looks shaken, the camera calls it truth. The more the film depends on pain as style, the easier it becomes to treat discomfort as part of the craft. Uma did not frame every moment in the same way Tarantino did. He later said some choices were discussed, defended, or made to avoid repeated takes. That context matters. It keeps the script from turning memory into a single verdict, yet the pattern remains hard to ignore. The director kept moving closer to the body of the woman whose trust made the film possible. After the camera cut, the set could return to professional language. Shot done, reset, move on. But authority does not disappear between takes. If the person who once protected you is now the person crossing the line, the mind has nowhere easy to place the alarm. So she endured. Not because endurance meant consent without pressure, not because silence meant comfort. She endured because the relationship had been built out of gratitude, admiration, and artistic dependency. To push back against Tarantino was not only to question a director, it was to question the man she had treated as shelter. That is how the trap tightened. The more she accepted, the more his authority looked natural. The more the crew watched without stopping it, the more the set learned where power lived. A director does not need to announce ownership when everyone has already arranged themselves around his vision. By the end of this phase, the danger had changed shape. It was no longer only pressure in rehearsal or contact in a scene. It was a belief system. The camera shot was the priority, and the actor's physical limits came second. That belief system was about to ask for something worse. Days before the end of filming, a blue convertible appeared on a dirt road in Mexico. A bright blue Volkswagen Carmen Ghia waiting on a dirt road, polished enough to look harmless from a distance. On screen, that car belonged to myth. The bride would drive through the landscape with her hair moving in the wind, pointed toward the final chapter of revenge. It was supposed to be a clean image. Woman, road, speed, control. Off-screen, according to Thurman's later account, the image already felt wrong before the camera rolled. The car had been altered for the shot. Public reporting later described warnings around the vehicle, including a reconfigured transmission and concerns that it was not working right. Thurman said a teamster told her the car might not be safe. She also said the seat was not properly secured. None of that sounds cinematic. It sounds like labor risk hiding under production pressure. That distinction matters. A trained stunt driver is not a luxury decoration. A stunt driver exists because bodies, machines, surfaces, and speed can betray each other in seconds. Thurman was an actor, not a professional driver hired to test a questionable car on a sandy road. Her request was simple: let a stunt person do it. The request was not dramatic. It was the baseline a production should understand when an actor is placed inside a modified vehicle. She was a mother of two, carrying a film that already demanded sword work, bruises, and exhaustion. Asking for a trained driver was not fear. It was basic professional judgment. In a safer room, that request would have ended the debate. On this set, it became a challenge to authority. Because Tarantino had seen her talent and had once confronted Weinstein, his reassurance carried unusual weight when she doubted the car. According to Thurman, Tarantino came into her trailer angry because refusal had cost time. Tarantino later denied barging in or screaming and said he did not see the shot as a stunt. That denial belongs in the record. So does his later admission. He told her the road was straight, told her the car was safe, and he was wrong. The road became part of the argument. Thurman's account says it was sandy and not straight. Tarantino later said he had driven the road in one direction and believed it was safe, but the driving direction changed for the shot. That detail is cold because it shows how small a miscalculation can look before the damage arrives. One direction tested, another direction used. One assumption carried into a machine. Then came the speed. The number was not about story. It was about hair. Thurman said Tarantino told her to hit 40 miles per hour, or her hair would not blow the right way and he would make her do it again. That is the part that turns the scene from risky into obscene. The demand was not framed around character truth or emotional necessity. It was the physics of blonde hair catching wind. This is how objectification reaches its lowest point. A woman who had trained for months, carried the film, shaped the character, and trusted the director was reduced to a moving composition. Face forward, drive faster, give the frame what it wants. If the body hesitates, the shot is ruined. The car did not need to look evil. That made it worse. Its danger was practical, dull, and easy to dismiss. A road surface, a seat, a transmission, a speed note, a director's certainty. Hollywood has always been good at hiding danger inside ordinary instructions. Stand there, wear this, drive there, do it again. Uma gave in. Not because the fear disappeared, because fear had been cornered by authority, debt, and the machinery of the day. She walked out of the trailer and toward the car that would carry the shot. Around her, the set kept functioning. People had jobs. Cameras had positions. The schedule had needs. She climbed into the blue Carmen Ghia and took the driver's seat. Then she turned the key. The engine started, and the impact came fast. The car left the path and crashed into a palm tree. No musical cue could soften it. No edit could turn it into choreography. The fantasy of the invincible heroine stopped against a trunk in real time. For a breath, the set had no myth left to sell. There was only the damaged car, the stunned silence, and the woman inside it. The movie had asked for a clean image of motion. It got proof of what happens when trust is treated like a safety plan. According to descriptions of the footage and Thurman's later account, crew members rushed toward her. Tarantino appeared near the car. The moment was not a performance anymore. It was a production facing the human cost of certainty. Thurman later described the position of her body in the wreck with terror. The steering wheel was against her, her legs were trapped beneath her, and pain shot through her before she knew what still worked. In that first rush of fear, she thought she might never walk again. That fear is the emotional center of the scene, not the metal, not the vehicle. The center is recognition. She had said the car felt unsafe. She had asked for a stunt driver. She had been told the road was straight and the car was fine. Now, her body was inside the answer. The betrayal did not wait for a courtroom or a headline. It arrived in the seconds after impact. When a person you trust tells you danger is manageable and the danger proves real, the body hears the apology too late. She was taken to the hospital. The movie star title did not matter under fluorescent light. The bride could survive 1,000 stylized blows on screen. Uma Thurman had to measure damage in a neck brace, injured knees, and a concussion. This is where cinema's language becomes useless. Words like dedication, vision, realism, and authenticity cannot sit beside a hospital bed and explain why a performer had to be the one driving. They cannot repair a nervous system that has learned, in one collision, that the set is not safer because famous people are standing nearby. When she returned, the emotional rupture was already open. Thurman said she was upset and wanted to see the car. She also said she had an enormous fight with Tarantino and accused him of putting her life at risk. Tarantino did not believe he had done that. That difference matters. One side felt nearly sacrificed. The other felt accused of intent he denied. But the deeper damage was not only about intent, it was about outcome. Intent can be argued for years. The body keeps its own record. A neck remembers, knees remember, trust remembers the moment it stopped being safe. That is why the crash broke more than a scene. It broke the story Uma had been living inside. Tarantino had been the artist who saw her mind, the ally who stood between her and Weinstein, the director whose danger had once felt purposeful. After the crash, that belief could no longer hold its shape. In a later reflection, Thurman used a phrase that cut through the entire mythology. She said she went from being a creative contributor and performer to being like a broken tool. That image is colder than anger. A tool is valued while it functions. When it breaks, the room does not grieve. It calculates. That was the humiliation beneath the injury. The woman playing the hero had become something used, damaged, and set aside. The yellow suit could still glow on screen. The revenge fantasy could still sell power. But the person inside it had learned what the machine did when the image cost too much. The crash was over. The wound was not. And before she could recover her ground, another machine began to move. Not with cameras this time, but with legal folders, studio silence, and a tape locked away from the woman who needed it most. Control of the footage meant control of the story. Without it, Thurman had memory and injury. With it, she had a record the public could see. It could show the road, the movement of the car, and the crash itself. It could help answer the question the studio would prefer to keep abstract. Was this a random mishap, or the visible result of a decision that should never have been made? According to Thurman's later account, 2 weeks after the crash, she had her lawyer send a letter to Miramax. The letter summarized what had happened and reserved her right to sue. That step changed the tone. The conversation was no longer only emotional. It had entered the language studios respect most: liability. Liability is where empathy often disappears. Once a studio hears that word, the injured person can stop looking like a collaborator and start looking like exposure. The question shifts from how do we repair this to how do we contain this? Miramax did not hand over the footage according to the accounts that followed. The company offered to show it under a condition. Thurman said she would have to sign a document releasing the company from consequences tied to her future, pain, and suffering. In plain language, she could see the record of what happened to her body only if she gave away a path to accountability. That is the coldest turn in this part of the story. The footage belonged to the event that injured her, yet access to it was placed behind a legal gate. The studio did not need to shout. It did not need to insult her. It only needed a document, a condition, and the patience to wait out an actress with more pain than leverage. There is a table, a lawyer, and language designed to sound neutral in the room. Future pain and suffering, release, consequences. The words are clean because the system needs them clean. For Kill Bill, the stakes were huge. The film was being sold as a stylized revenge epic, a story of a woman reclaiming force from the people who tried to destroy her. Public footage of its lead performer being hurt during production would have cut through that campaign. It would have dragged the audience out of myth and back into the workplace. So the tape became dangerous in a different way, not because of what it could do to Uma. The damage to her body had already happened. It was dangerous because of what it could do to the brand, the studio, and the story Hollywood wanted viewers to buy. Thurman refused to sign. That refusal matters. It meant she would not trade away the future consequences of her injury for the chance to see the past with her own eyes. It was a hard kind of dignity. She kept her rights but lost the immediate evidence. That is how institutions win without winning an argument. They make the price of proof unbearable. Without the footage, speaking carried another risk. She could be framed as emotional, difficult, angry, unreliable. A studio does not need to erase a woman if it can make her sound expensive to believe. That is why buried evidence changes the shape of silence. It does not remove the truth. It leaves the truth trapped without its sharpest proof. The result was not closure. It was a long suspension. The movie moved forward. The campaign moved forward. The image of the bride kept traveling through culture as a symbol of power. Behind it, Uma carried a private record she could not access and a wound the industry had learned to file away. The locked footage did not create one wound. It preserved two. On one side was Miramax, the company tied to Weinstein, the man Thurman said had crossed her boundaries years earlier. On the other side was Tarantino, the artist she had trusted to protect her. The crash hurt her body. What followed hurt trust. That is the shape of double betrayal. If the studio behaves coldly, the cruelty fits the machine. Lawyers protect money. Executives protect release dates. But when the person who once felt like shelter becomes part of the wall, the mind loses its last clean exit. For Uma, Tarantino had never been only an employer. He had seen her strangeness, written for it, built Mia Wallace and the bride around it, and stood up to Weinstein when others had not. That history made the silence around the footage harder to bear. It was not only a director withholding material, it was the trusted witness standing too close to the institution that hurt her. The rupture stayed with them. Thurman later said she and Tarantino were in a terrible fight for years. They still had to promote the movies. That meant smiling beside a work whose making had become a private battleground. The public saw a director selling a revenge epic. Underneath, the relationship was thin ice. The breaking point arrived at Soho House. Thurman described a fight in 2004, both of them shouting because he would not let her see the crash footage and because he said that was what everyone had decided. Tarantino later described a major dinner there where they dealt with resentments around the car. Either way, the location became the place where the private wound forced itself into speech. That scene matters because it shows how long harm can survive inside professional ritual. A premiere ends. A press tour ends. The body keeps hurting. The person who is supposed to understand becomes another person explaining why the door cannot open. At the same time, her personal life was breaking in public. Thurman and Ethan Hawke separated around the period and later divorced. It would be irresponsible to claim the crash caused the marriage to end. The record is not that clean, but the overlap matters emotionally. While she was carrying pain from the set and anger over the hidden tape, she was also becoming a single mother under scrutiny. She refused to turn that family pain into entertainment. In interviews, she made clear that children should not have to read private family damage in the papers. That restraint gave her dignity, but it also left her with fewer public words. She protected the children by keeping the most personal parts sealed. Motherhood became the anchor and the limit. By the middle of the decade, Thurman spoke openly about how hard it was to be both a full-time mother and an actress. In a 2005 interview, she said she refused to read scripts outside New York City because she needed to be home. Ethan Hawke later said she planned films around New York to stay close. That was not career laziness, it was triage. The industry reads absence as decline because it measures devotion by availability. If you will not move, fly, stay, and disappear into production for months, the machine assumes you have cooled. But sometimes a smaller career footprint is not surrender. It is a boundary. Even her earlier regret over The Lord of the Rings belongs in this frame, but carefully. She later said she had been offered the role of Eowyn and considered turning it down, one of her worst decisions. Her reason was not the Kill Bill crash. She said she had had her first child and felt housebound. That detail matters because it shows the same conflict existed before the accident, career scale against the gravity of home. After Kill Bill, that gravity became heavier. The physical cost of the film, the fight over the footage, the divorce, and the need to protect her children narrowed the map. She kept working, but the mythology of unstoppable ascent had been punctured. Off-screen, the woman audiences saw with a sword was calculating school nights, custody rhythms, pain, reputation, and the price of leaving home. This is how silence forms, not from weakness, from arithmetic. What will speaking cost? What will travel cost? What will another fight with powerful men cost the children who still need breakfast, bedtime, and a mother who can stand steady in the room? Secrets kept hidden do not disappear. They wait for the world to give them a place to break open. For years, the footage stayed out of reach. Then Me Too changed the air. In the autumn of 2017, the old fortress around Harvey Weinstein began to crack in public. Stories that had once been whispered through agencies, hotels, and sets were suddenly being printed, named, and believed by people with power to amplify them. Uma did not rush into that first wave with a long television confession. She waited. That delay gave her anger a different temperature. It did not look frantic. It looked controlled. On Thanksgiving, she posted a black and white image from Kill Bill and wrote a message aimed at Weinstein and the people she called his wicked conspirators. The line that traveled fastest was the coldest one. In it, she suggested accountability should come slowly. It was not a plea. It was a warning that her silence had reached its end. That post mattered because it refused the expected performance of softness. She was not asking the public to feel sorry for her in the usual celebrity rhythm. She was signaling judgment. The bride's image, once used to sell stylized vengeance, now became a frame for real accusation. But anger alone could not open the locked room. To force the story out of memory and into evidence, she needed the footage. That meant turning back toward the man at the center of the second betrayal. Tarantino had carried his own version of regret for years, but regret without evidence had left the power structure intact. As Weinstein's empire collapsed, the old loyalties became weaker. Tarantino later said the car incident was one of the biggest regrets of his life. He also gave Thurman the footage, the piece of visual record she had been denied for so long. Accounts describe the recovery as happening through production channels after years of distance, resentment, and locked access. That handover was not a clean redemption. It did not erase the pressure, the argument, the hospital, or the years she spent without the tape. A delayed act of accountability is still delayed, but it changed the balance of the story. For the first time, the image no longer belonged only to the company, the director, or the archive. It belonged to the woman whose body had paid for it. That shift is the heart of this phase. The powerful had controlled the finished film. They had controlled the marketing. They had controlled the silence around the raw material. Once Thurman had the footage, she could decide what the public would see. She could move the crash out of rumor and into the record without asking the studio to translate her pain. In early February of 2018, the New York Times published Maureen Dowd's profile of Thurman. The piece brought together her allegations against Weinstein, her account of the Kill Bill car incident, and the footage hidden from public view. The video did not need narration to make its point. Its force came from the fact that it existed. Viewers clicked play expecting a scandal document. What they saw was the gap between cinema and production laid bare. A movie can ask audiences to worship the final image. Raw footage asks a harsher question. What did that image cost before it became entertainment? The release did not make Thurman untouched. It did not give back the years, the physical ease, or the faith she had lost in people who called themselves collaborators. But it did return one form of power. She could finally stop arguing from memory alone. She could show the things she had been told could remain behind a gate. That is why the footage became more than evidence. It became a transfer of authorship. The story of the crash no longer had to pass through Miramax's silence or Tarantino's regret before reaching the public. It could arrive through her decision, her timing, and her refusal to keep carrying the damage privately. The wider meaning reached beyond one actress. Young performers entering the industry could see the warning written inside the case. A glamorous set is still a workplace, and a celebrated director is still responsible for the human body in front of the camera. Art does not cancel duty. Vision does not cancel consent. A masterpiece does not cancel the record of how it was made. Uma had reclaimed the frame, but not without cost. The tape could prove what happened. It could not refund youth, trust, cartilage, or years spent waiting for the truth to become usable. The evidence came back. The loss remained visible to everyone. And that is where the story moves toward its final question. When a film becomes legendary, how much damage does the audience agree to forget? Picture the wardrobe room after the cameras are gone. No music, no applause, only a yellow suit hanging from a wire hanger, bright enough to summon the bride, empty enough to expose the cost of the myth. On screen, that suit means force. A woman rises from betrayal, picks up a blade, and crosses the world to answer the people who tried to erase her. Audiences know the stance, the color, the silhouette, and the promise of control returned. They remember the pleasure of watching a heroine take back control. That memory is not false. Kill Bill remains a landmark of style, rhythm, and cinematic nerve. The two Kill Bill films earned more than $330 million worldwide. They gave pop culture one of its sharpest images of female vengeance. They also gave Hollywood a story it loves to sell: pain transformed into power, damage polished into iconography, survival cut into perfect frames. But the story behind the frame refuses to stay clean. The body wearing the suit was not a symbol. It was a person. It trained, trusted, argued, crashed, hurt, waited, and fought for the right to see what had happened to it. The fantasy told viewers that the heroine controlled violence. The production history asks whether the actress controlled her own safety. That is the fracture at the center of the legacy. The film can still be brilliant. The images can still hold power. But brilliance does not erase the method. A scene can be unforgettable and still carry a debt. A director can make history and still owe an answer for the body placed in danger to make it. Hollywood survives by asking audiences to separate the finished work from the human cost behind it. Sometimes that separation protects art. Sometimes it protects the people who profit from harm. The difference matters. Uma Thurman's story does not ask viewers to stop seeing Kill Bill. It asks them to see more. See the yellow suit, then see the neck brace, see the revenge fantasy, then see the worker inside the myth. When the credits fade, the question left behind is not whether great cinema can come from pain. It can. The harder question is who gets to decide when that pain was worth it, and who is left carrying the bill after everyone else calls it art.